Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a discussion that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make sense. I had a thought the other day while I was reading Dr. Thorne, which is the third in Anthony Trollope's Barchester Chronicles series. I had a thought about Trollope and that book and why I was liking it so much and why I liked Barchester Towers, which I read last year, the second in the series, so much, and why I even liked The Warden, and why those books just kind of felt like home, felt like reading from my, reading something that just made me all at once feel like completely immersed in a place, in a situation that felt like something, that just felt right to me. That felt, his books feel like something I'm going to want to read all of and more of, even outside that particular series of books. And it occurred to me that the reason why, perhaps, I like Trollope's work so much, and some of the other authors who you've heard me mention, discuss here, dozens of times, has to do with my beginnings as a reader of fantasy. So, if you don't know, and if you watch my channel you do, when I was a kid I read a lot of fantasy novels, as kids do. I read the Chronicles of Narnia. I think those are the first kind of fantasy series that I read. I think the books were given to me as a box set gift by my grandmother. I read, I think when I was in the 5th grade, around 12, my mother gave me the box set of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and I read those books obsessively, really kind of for the next 5 to 6 years, reading them over and over again. I also read the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant by Stephen R. Donaldson, which was kind of a much more kind of rougher, adultish feeling fantasy series. And then I read the Belgariad series, at least I think the first Belgariad series of books by David Eddings. And I read those books. And that was really, what I read as a kid up until, I was around the age of, 17 or 18. Those are the books that I read the most of. And if you read fantasy, and even if you don't read fantasy, I think that you're well aware that in fantasy, one of the keys to a good fantasy series is good world building. And I think all of those books do a fairly good job of world building. So it occurred to me then, what is this world, when I was thinking about this, it occurred to me, what is this world building thing that we're really talking about? Well, to me, there are kind of 3 elements that are important in terms of world building in fantasy novels. And the first one of those elements is a specific, identifiable, definable geography, an actual place. An actual place that can be described physically, that you can know about. And, one of the things that's kind of a fantasy trope, a fantasy staple, that's probably a better term, for fantasy novels, is to have some kind of a map. So, the Chronicles of Narnia, I don't know that C.S. Lewis actually produced a map, but maps were produced of Narnia and the adjacent countries and worlds adjacent to Narnia. So in the Narnia books, you have that map. Certainly in Tolkien's books, you have the map of Middle Earth, which, if you were a nerd like me, you studied over and over again. And since my map was in the inside fold, in the inside of a book, I had to bend the spine a lot to see what was in the crack where the map had ran over the curl of the page, where the 2 pages met. There's maps in the Thomas Covenant Chronicle series books, and there's a map in the Book of the Belgariad. There's a definable world, a place, a geographic location where you can center these books. Even when I recently read the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemison, there's a map. Fantasy novels kind of begin, I think, world building. I'm not saying the author did this way, but for those books actually begin with an actual map quite frequently. And so a definable, clear, geographic location to me is a part of what is, at the heart of fantasy novels. In addition to that, one of the things that is a part of this world building is to create a real history and a real culture for the location of these things, for where these things take place, and for the people we're talking about. So, in all 4 of those series, the Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, the Thomas Covenant Chronicles, and the Belgariad. In all four of those, there's a history. There is constant reference to what came before. There are usually characters who remember or who can inform the characters in the present day of the stories about the history that came before. There is definable culture. There is a language. There is, music. There are terms. There's perhaps some kind of a religious system that exists. There might be, in the case of more modern fantasy novels, a magic system that exists. There are definable cultures. Certainly this is true with Narnia, even though Narnia is essentially an allegory for Christianity in lots of ways, the Chronicles of Narnia are. That gives it a real kind of background. In the Chronicles of Narnia, you can read them in order, and it provides history. We get outside cultures like in The Horse and the Boy and in The Silver Chair, places that are slightly outside of Narnia that exist, but within the same world. Certainly in Thomas Covenant's novels, there's all the events that happen before Covenant goes to that place, before he gets involved in trying to save that place in the First and the Second Chronicles. That history is there. There are words, there are languages, there are religious systems, there are different cultures of people. Certainly Tolkien, went overboard, and you might even say, I think, could reasonably argue that the thing that really interested Tolkien the most about Middle-earth was creating that whole world with languages and music and different cultures and different groups of people and creating that history. One of the least favorite characters I think in Tolkien, a lot of people seem to indicate is Tom Bombadil, but what an interesting mystery to put in the stories, to kind of make it complete, that there are actually things that are unexplained. This is also true of the Belgariad with the magic system and who, the main character is and where he comes from and who, anyway. So all those things are true. And then the third thing, I think, that is true in a lot of fantasy series that's a part of that world building are recurring characters, or at least references to recurring characters. In the Chronicles of Narnia, the Pevensey children, the first four children, they show up in the first and second books, and then in the third book, and then somebody related to them in the fourth book, and so on. That it kind of works out that way, and then they're present again, I believe, in the last battle, if memory serves. Aslan is certainly a presence in all those novels as a recurring character. With Lord of the Rings, we have Gandalf, we have Elrond, we have Bilbo, who is a carryover character, who carries over from one to the other. And this is true in the other fantasy series that I read. So to me, what I'm thinking is that since that's where I really started reading, that became just kind of like embedded in my idea of what made books enjoyable, what made the reading experience for me enjoyable. And I think that has carried over into my more, I don't want to say grown up because that sounds like judgmental, but into my adult reading taste, let's say that way, using the word adult just to mean that I'm older. And when I started thinking about that, in terms of some of my favorite authors, and in terms of thinking about Trollope, this kind of pattern immediately became evident to me. Let me go take care of Ike so he'll be quiet. So, obviously it won't shock you when I tell you that William Faulkner is one of my favorite authors. And my favorite Faulkner novels, as a matter of fact, the only ones I've really read are the ones that take place in the fictional Yoknapatawpha County. There is a specific geographic location. Faulkner eventually even, created a map of Yoknapatawpha County. It feels like a real place inhabited by real people. It has a real history, connected to the Civil War and to Reconstruction. There's a real history there. There's a definite culture there, a culture of racism and decay and kind of somewhat almost like Southern Gothic kind of weird things that are happening there in Yoknapatawpha County. And there are recurring characters and references to recurring characters. There's a whole website which will tell you, which characters show up in which books and kind of how they're connected and family trees. And so, in thinking about this all together, going from my love of fantasy to Faulkner, in a sense, Faulkner creates his own world. There is world building in the same sense with Faulkner and Yakima County as there is in the fantasy series that I read when I was a kid. This is also true then of my favorite French writer, Honore de Balzac. Now, he doesn't create a fictional world, but his world is Paris, and it is peopled. You know, Paris itself plays a role. It is a feature in the novel. And if, you know, I've been to Paris once for a significant amount of time, once for a short time, and having been there, you know, I, at least sometimes pick up on the geography that he's talking about, and that Paris society is a very specific place, and it has a specific culture, and it has a specific history in this kind of, it's grounded in the history of the post kind of Napoleonic return of the monarchy and so on. That is a specific history, and it's a specific culture with its own values, with its own social mores, with its own kind of grasping attempt at social climbing, which is very much like the Snopes trilogy in Faulkner. There are recurring characters who show up in several books, characters who are, featured in several books. Sometimes they just walk in and out of other books, but they're there creating this kind of dense, rich, complex society. In other words, Balzac creates an entire world. This is also true then of Patrick O'Brian. I've mentioned the Aubrey Maturin series here of 21 books, about Captain Aubrey and Dr. Maturin, who are friends and go on seafaring adventures, in the kind of Napoleonic era of world history. And, O'Brian creates recurring characters. It's not just those two characters who occur over and over again, but their wives, their other shipmates, figures from the government show up over and over again. There are, there's a whole culture of life on the ship, which you learn when you are reading the books about what things mean and who reports to who and what job this person does and how all those different groups relate to one another. There's even a map of a ship in the front of the Aubrey Maturin novel, so you get some idea of what a square-rigged frigate looks like. Just as there are maps in fantasy books, and they are set in a specific historical time period, which O'Brian knew a lot about, and he makes very real. I think this is also then going to be true for me with the books of Louise Erdrich. I love Louise Erdrich's books. I haven't read all that many. I think four, maybe five. Four. I'm going to say 4 Louise Erdrich novels. I want to read all of them, but many of them are set in a very specific location, which is essentially a fictionalized version of the Turtle Mountain Reservation, which is an Ojibwe reservation in North Dakota. And you have recurring characters who show up in books throughout the series that is set there. You have a very specific history, the history of the Ojibwe people and the struggles they have on the reservation. You have a specific culture with its own belief system, its own language, and kind of the interplay between the modern and the older First Nations world, conflict between the First Nations people and the American culture and society, all taking place there. And then I think that's also going to be true with Trollope in terms of Barsetshire and recurring characters and places and themes that show up over and over again. So I have a feeling that Trollope will become exactly the same kind, to me, the English version of Balzac and Faulkner, etc. And he will be that writer I want to read obsessively, that writer whose works I fall into quite easily and feel like they are home and mean something to me and automatically resonate with me, just as the works of Faulkner, O'Brian, Balzac, Erdrich do. And I think that has its basis in that kind of world building which took place in fantasy, because all the novelists I'm talking about who aren't fantasy novels in this video created a world, created a very specific world with its own customs, its own culture, its own history, with a specific geography, and with recurring characters and references to recurring characters over and over again. And so, I'm not sure if this video is all that, earth-shattering, but it occurred to me that that's where the love of those authors might have come from, probably came from, and therefore I have to credit my early fantasy reading with, really influencing my fictional choices and my fictional loves today. Anyway, there you go. That's today's video. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below. As always, thank you for watching.